Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today, sitting down to talk about Final Fantasy XVI. Ladies and gentlemen, if you watch Retro Rebound, you know I've been going all in on Final Fantasy this last year or so, where we've been doing a lot of first-time playthroughs for games like Final Fantasy VI and 9, 10, just really catching up on the franchise and growing my appreciation for it. Most recently, we did Final Fantasy 15, and a lot of this was fueled by the excitement I had for 16. But before we get into that, a word from today's sponsor. Hey, what's going on here? Hold on. Silver Wolf, I should have known. This video is brought to you by Honkai Star Rail. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the latest game from the makers of Genshin Impact, and I gotta tell you all about it because I know a lot of y'all out there are really into turn-based games, and that's what this one is. The gameplay really speaks to me because of that, but also the character art design. They just have so much personality in them, and yes, the one who hacked our video is one of the latest in Silver Wolf. She's one of the best hackers in the universe, and also a member of the mysterious organization known as the Stellaron Hunters. She's a genius hacker with this rebellious spirit and scoffs at the authority and rules with few things in the universe able to rouse her interest, but clearly this channel has, because here she is. So she has a lot of hacking abilities in game, and she's able to add weaknesses to her enemies and is a powerful support capable of decent damage output. So personally, I'm very excited for Silver Wolf. I'm just getting into the game now, and I encourage you to try this one out for yourself. Silver Wolf from Honkai Star Rail is out right now, so check the pinned comment and link in my description to download the game and try her out for yourself. And be sure to use my promo code for 50 Stellar Jades. Hey, before I begin, thank you all so much for showing up. I understand that I am late to the party compared to other game reviewers. The game's already available for purchase. That naturally sinks the performance of the video. I don't know whose Cheerios I've pissed in lately, but quite frankly, getting review codes has been extremely difficult. So I apologize. I know a lot of you look for day one reviews for me, and it's been scarily inconsistent, and it's frustrating. But for those of you who still show up, thank you. I appreciate you. We saw over 100,000 people show up to our Diablo 4 review, even though that was a little bit late. So if you showed up for this, again, thank you. All right, let's talk Final Fantasy 16. I saw a lot of glowing reviews for this one. As I've been playing it through here, I gotta say, I'm not really in that same camp. Not a bad game, though. Let me explain why. As the JRPG genre grows, so too does Final Fantasy, the grandfather of JRPGs. And with that comes the realization that this has always been a franchise about doing something completely different from the last entry. While this game is very much a quest of revenge and linear and focused on action combat, the game before this was Boys Trip the video game. That's why every fan of the series has vastly different opinions, and also why every Final Fantasy doesn't speak to every Final Fantasy fan. 16 is reminiscent of 12 to me in its politically driven storyline, Type 0 in its lack of hesitation to go to the dark areas as an M-rated Final Fantasy game, but it also has shades of Final Fantasy's more complicated past. It very much reminded me of my first playthrough of Final Fantasy XIII in its absolute dedication to combat hallways that serve as the conduit from cutscene to cutscene. However, where 16 shines is its presentation, as it's some of the best that we have ever seen from the franchise in general, and frankly, across gaming. But the cutscenes absorb so much of the spotlight that most of the game is just watching those cutscenes, in my opinion. Seriously, like, Final Fantasy 16 is some of the most stop-and-go traffic I've had in a recent game. Combat struggles as well to engage, as it trips into the same pitfall that many action games do, where the enemy variety doesn't encourage full use of your arsenal. It's flashy and it can be fun, but spongy enemies zap some of the thrill of fights. Once it finally opens up from its linear structure, you're met with some side quests that make the ones in 7 Remake look like a work of art. I know most of you already clicked on your dislike button, but yet I still can't not recommend Final Fantasy 16, because like with any game really, but truly I think Final Fantasy captures this the most, this may be right up your alley. And personally, I can recognize and see how that would be the case. While there are certain things in this game that aren't speaking to me, I'm not here to say, they're bad, stay away, bad game. In fact, there's a lot here that you may love about this. A lot of things I may have critiques of that you may sit here and go, you know what, that actually sounds fire. And that's exactly what this series has always been about, based off what I've learned in these last number of years playing through all these games. Everyone has different idiosyncrasies, preferences, ways they lean into these games. And so what I'm saying here very well may be the entry point you've been looking for, or the type of Final Fantasy game you always dreamt of. For me, in a lot of ways, I can't help but feel like I don't want this to be the future of Final Fantasy. You see, Final Fantasy XVI has what I'd call Dragon Age syndrome. Inquisition's MMO-like direction really betrayed the heart of the game. While its main story was fantastic because it was an MMO-like experience, the war table became not this cool feature, but in fact something that really obstructed the game constantly. I think of that much with Final Fantasy XVI. I mentioned Yoshi P at the top of this, and yeah, the MMO director certainly had a hand in this one. You can tell with the game's side quests, how they're written, and how they're paced. Even to the way when quests are completed, the UI, the layout, you can feel a lot of energy from Final Fantasy XIV. And for FF14 fans, that's fantastic. Now, it's not just a Final Fantasy XVI problem with bad side quests. A lot of this industry has horrendous side quests, and I don't know what's happened. I remember the days where sometimes these were the highlights of the game. I think of Arkham City, where the rogues gallery they had and the side quest lines you could go through in there were awesome. Of course, Bethesda Game Studios titles shine in this department as well. But games from Square Enix, especially lately, Final Fantasy VII Remake, 16, just have awful side quests that are go here, grab this piece of wood, and come back. Jog over here, kill this group of enemies, continue on, and talk to someone in the next town. It is very MMO-like in that way, where you're not going to necessarily go out of your way constantly, and a lot of these areas are structured into little zones. Now, personally, I like this. I like that Final Fantasy XVI is a bunch of zones effectively strung together. Now, some, I would say zones is generous. They would be more like hallways, but as the game does break open more and more, there is a sense of freedom finally, after I'd say like the 10th hour in the game, that you really get to break free and explore. It's just that the content you finally get to do and indulge in and jog around and engage with is, I don't think, the best it has to offer. The main story really is the best offering here, but it struggles as well. I'll get into that in a moment, but let's continue with the Dragon Age syndrome, because it's not just Inquisition, it's also Dragon Age 2. I saw a lot of people's critiques online heading into the launch of this game when the embargo had lifted, and I get it. I feel like Dragon Age 2 suffered much of the same fate, where it was really heavily critiqued, largely because it was deemed the follow-up from Dragon Age Origins, which was a Game of the Year, and for some people, best game of all time candidate. Mark Dara, originally of BioWare, had said that Dragon Age 2 was to be called Dragon Age Exodus before they slapped the number title on. And he thought that perhaps if it was called Dragon Age Exodus, that reviewers would have been a little more kind to the game, and it's something that I can certainly sympathize with and understand and feel definitely applies to Final Fantasy XVI. You see, Dragon Age 2 was a massive departure from what Dragon Age Origins had established. This tactical RPG with deep choice and consequence and a vast world to explore had now been contained into one city with action combat, again going directly against the grain of anything you had seen previously. So when you look at Final Fantasy XVI, when you're a numbered entry, the bar raises quite a bit. And I think there's a lot of stuff here, like changes in vibe, changes on what a Final Fantasy game actually is, that would be more accepted if maybe it was Final Fantasy Vengeance or some type of subtitle that kind of gave it a little more wiggle room. So I do think there is a lot of harsh criticism coming its way because of its labeling. But that major deviation cannot be ignored. For example, Final Fantasy XVI is barely an RPG. It's more of an action game. Again, this is why I say it's not something that should steer you away from it. It's just something you gotta be aware of. Like the ability scaling, you'll just put points into some of these trees and unlock new moves. You'll throw on new equipment scarcely, but there's no party members. None of that stuff from the old Final Fantasy games is here. And in some ways, it's funny because I thought Final Fantasy 15 was a major departure. I mean, for God's sakes, have we not seen the magic system in that game? You practically throw fire as a grenade. It's ridiculous. So that game was already a major departure. I think Final Fantasy XVI keeps the spirit in a lot of ways, but mechanically speaking, not at all. I mentioned the main story is really the highlight here. That's because the acting really elevates the experience. Clive is on a quest for revenge following the opening hours of the game. If you played the demo, you already know what I'm talking about. And his mission is compelling out the gate, but gradually loses a lot of steam before veering its focus elsewhere. Now, pacing is the enemy of this game, truly, as far as I'm concerned. Its inability to get into a rhythm was a big reason I felt myself bouncing off of it. This is due to the game being predominantly cutscenes, as I said earlier. What this leads to is that control is being stripped away from the player endlessly, which I don't feel works really well in an action game. Even during major boss fights, like highlights of the game, you'll get the enemy down to about halfway of their health bar, and the game will take care of the rest, like, here you go, old chap, no problem, we got you covered. It's like, no, don't get me wrong, the spectacle here is awe-inspiring, but my personal frustration just wins the day here. Many big sequences are dominated by quick time events, which is frustrating because you couldn't finish the boss yourself, and it just will never let you. And genuinely, I found that aspect of the game quite shocking. Like, imagine you're fighting the Phantom Train in Final Fantasy VI, and then halfway through the fight, the game just says, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Just press square here, R1 here. You get a lot of time to do so. It's very much clearly, I feel, going for the let's grab the, and I say this with all generosity, y'all know what I'm talking about, the more casual player. Let's get them involved. Let's have them enjoy this. But even when you choose like, hey, I want to play action focused, there's a setting in the beginning of the game. I feel like this type of stuff would be a thing of the past, but I feel like this type of stuff wouldn't make its way into that kind of experience, but clearly that's not the case. So yeah, 16 is a game that I feel does a lot right in the terms of its acting, in its presentation, its epic boss fights. The combat can feel pretty good at times when it really lets you get into it, which I feel is far too scarce, especially in the early going. It's hard to get into that rhythm and really enjoy some of the things the game is setting up. And especially when the enemies are spongy, it makes it all the more tedious at times, which is not what the combat system is clearly going for. But what it led me thinking once I was exiting my experience was, you know, I like this a lot in some ways. I don't think it's something you have to steer away from completely, but no doubt about it, I can't say that this is the future of Final Fantasy. If you were to ask me that, and you can call me elitist if you'd like, I know it's probably not an uncommon take, but I feel Final Fantasy VII Remake is modern Final Fantasy perfected. It has all the production value, all of the characteristics, the character focus. It has everything there while still being an action game, yet at the same time letting you plot, consider, hey, what's my next move here? And slowly going through that, which goes back to more of its traditional roots. I feel it's a best of all worlds, but that's the 7 Remake path. And as I said before, the mainline entries continue to walk their own path, each entry and each entry and each entry. This is something no doubt Square Enix is completely aware of. They said in a prior interview that they thought about removing the numbered titles from Final Fantasy games, that maybe rebooting it would be something that they would look into, and so on and so forth. So I imagine they're very well aware that 16 is a major departure in a lot of ways. Now, where it is Final Fantasy is not just in name, but in the spirit of the game, the way that they use some of the major summons that you've seen throughout the same series over and over and over. Here, the way they're utilized is as dominant. So let's say, for example, you are a dominant of Bahamut. That is like your summon. I think of it a lot like Megazords in Power Rangers, if you will, if you need a good reference there. That's how I personally look at it, but these are definitely a cool aspect of the game, as it's very focused on your different lords and different kingdoms battling it out in epic war. And hey, if there's anything from this game that I do really want to see carried forward, the M for mature rating is utilized here strongly. Blood, limbs getting chopped off, cursing. I mean, in that way, it feels like a really strong evolution of Final Fantasy, where it's got to this point. Sometimes they'd have to censor certain things. Sometimes they'd hold back a little bit to hit that T for team rating. I like that they're kind of putting their chest out and saying, hey, we are going to do a full-on M-rated game. We're dropping a lot of the series tropes here, and we're killing people. We're killing people, no problem. I mean, my heart broke when I saw Chocobo die. I was like, dude, no. Like, I've been riding these things for years and years and years with the and now it's dead. What? That's horrible. So the M for mature rating really works in the game's favor. With that, the top tier acting, the story really is the highlight here, and it better be. I mean, you're sitting through a ton of cutscenes. The problem is, like I mentioned, it veers a little bit and loses a little bit of focus, and that's where even then I'm like, is this really where we want to go? Like, at least if I'm playing it more, you kind of offset those problems, but when it's so heavily story focused and still loses focus, it makes you wonder a bit. But should you buy Final Fantasy XVI? Should you not? This is one of those very interesting situations where, as always, it's totally up to you. My personal verdict would be a bit of a wait for a sale, not because of quality, but just because I found too much there that I wasn't in love with. But I think for a lot of you out there, if what I said sounds like, hey, you know what, that does sound like my type of game. I want that linear style Final Fantasy game. I want more cutscenes, and I don't mind the broken up game. If that's good to you, that's no problem at all. I think you should ignore everything I had to say and go pick it up. Like, it's that type of game where the quality is not an issue here. The investment in the game is not an issue here. It's just about personal preference, as it always is with the reviews. But again, I think with Final Fantasy, given its heritage, given how long it's been around, it is a very different story here. So those are my thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI. A very impressive game, no doubt about it, but one that I personally feel like I'm not a big fan of the direction we're going in here. And I hope that they take a look at the success of 7 Remake and hopefully 7 Rebirth and start thinking about how they can incorporate those elements into a Final Fantasy XVII, which is a crazy high number. With that, ladies and gentlemen, since the game is out, of course, please share your thoughts on the title. If you're playing it, do you agree? Do you disagree? And yeah, I'm sure the comments will be fun here, but hey, let's try to keep it professional, shall we? With that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.